Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we are going to complete P3LAB together. And it's going to test our knowledge of using if-else statements. All right, so let's take a look at the instructions here. We're supposed to create a program that asks the user to enter amount of money as a float, so a decimal value. The program should output the amount of money using the most efficient combination of dollars, quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies. If none of a specific coin is required, do not display that coin at all. If one of a coin is required, use the singular form of the coin's name. If more than one of a certain coin is required, display the plural form of that coin's name. Let's take a look at some examples to get an idea of what the program's supposed to do. So the user is asked to enter an amount of money. In this case, the user entered $3.26, and the program outputs $3, 1 quarter, and 1 penny. And that does equal up to $3.26. Notice that because there are multiple dollars, we owe them $3. That has an S on it. Quarter, we only need 1, and that has no S. And also, we only need 1 penny, and that is grammatically correct, right? 1 penny, as opposed to like 2 pennies. Also notice that since we didn't need any dimes or nickels to make this amount of money, it does not print dimes or nickels at all. All right, those values just are not displayed. So let's take a look at 99 cents, 0.99. In order to make 99 cents, we need 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and 4 pennies. And that's the correct amount of money. And all of the coins that are printed out here, if we need more than one, we use the appropriate S on the end. Let's look at $1.07. That requires $1, 1 nickel, and 2 pennies. The change adds up to $1.07, so that's perfect. And the values that only have 1 of a certain coin, they do not have an S on the end. We need 2 pennies, so that does have an S on the end. All right. Let's continue looking at the directions. Hint, you will use the / operator for this program. Well, this actually is the operator for integer division, and we're going to talk about what that is. So go ahead and open idle. Remember that when we start a file from scratch and we first open idle, we do not code in this space here. We have to go to File, New File, and then we write our code here. I'm going to go ahead and close out the shell. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to save this. I'll save it in my downloads, and I will call it P3LAB. And you should do the same with your first and last name, then your first name. All right, and let's go ahead and save it. So you guys do not have to code this part. It's not part of the assignment, but we need to talk about that integer division that we just looked at, right? The / like that. So what that is it's just another way of doing division in Python, but instead of returning the entire answer from the division, it's only going to give you back the whole number portion of the answer. So let's look at some examples. If I use the regular old division operator, which is a single /, let's say we were doing 4 divided by 2. All right, and I've got it in a print statement, so the answer will display to the screen. The answer is 2. All right, Keep in mind that with this regular division, Python is going to turn the data type of the answer into a float. That's why it has the 0.0 on it. And if we were to change these numbers up, maybe we divide 5 by 2. Well, that should give us 2.5, right? Nice. So I can keep on going. What if I divide 1 into 3? Well, that'll give us 1/3, which should be the decimal 0.3333, repeating, right? And it gives us that back. So what we're going to do instead of using this regular division is we're going to use integer division. And instead of using a double or single forward slash, integer division uses a double. Do not put a space in between these two. They need to be right next to each other. All right, so let's go back to our example of 5 divided by 2. When we ran it the last time, it gave us back 2.5, which is the full answer to the division problem. But when we use this integer division, it's only going to return to us the whole number part of the answer. So if this answer is 2.5, but we use integer division, it's only going to give us back the 2. It's going to completely ignore the 0.5. Let's run it. Very nice. Exactly what we thought would happen. All right. So let's do a couple more examples. I'm going to change it back to the single division. And we're going to take a look at maybe 100 divided by 67. Actually, let's do a smaller number, 23. All right, I'm using regular division, so this will give me back the entire answer. Let's run it. And the answer is 4.35, essentially, if we rounded. All right, so once we do the same exact problem, but we're going to use integer division, it only will give us back the whole number part of this. So we should get back a 4. All right, let's change it to integer division by having 2 slashes, and let's give it a run. Beautiful. It gives us back the 4 only. All right, we'll do one more. We'll take 100, and we will divide it by something that does not go evenly, like a 7. If I do it with my single division, I get back the entire answer, 14.29, essentially. If we use the integer division and I run it, we should get back only the whole number, which was 14. All right, nice. So hopefully you understand how this integer division works, because we are going to have to use that in this program. Alrighty, first things first, if we look back at the instructions, we have to ask the user to enter an amount of money as a float. Let's do it. We are going to come into our code, and if we're asking the user to give us some piece of information, we're going to have to create a variable to save that information in. All right, so I'm going to call it change, the amount of money that we need to make the change for. In order to get information from the user, you've got to use your input function. And I'm going to say enter an amount of money. I'm going to put a colon, 1 single space. And since this is a money value, I'm going to go ahead and throw a $sign in there before I close up my quotation marks. All right. So what is this going to do? This is going to allow the user to enter an amount of money once the program runs. If you remember in the instructions, it said we were to bring this value in as a float. So that means we need to convert the value that the user gives us into a float. All right. So now, just to test this out, let's write a little print statement, and I'm going to make it an F string, and I'm going to say change amount. So in other words, the amount of money, that we need to make change for. All right. And since I'm using an F string, I'm going to print my variable now. I'm going to print the value held in this variable. And I'm going to throw it in a set of curly braces. So now we should be able to run the program and go ahead and give this first part a test. Enter an amount of money. Let's say $8.45. I press enter. Very nice. It's given us back the value that we put in, so we know that the value is being stored appropriately. All right, so now that we can get the value of change from the user and print it back out, we know that we have it stored successfully. Now I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret here. Float values are very difficult to work with if you're doing math that needs to be really precise. And the reasoning behind that, we're not going to get into. It's beyond the scope of this class. But just know that sometimes when you're doing math with float values, a tiny, 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 small, teeny tiny number can get added on to the end, and then it takes the value and it becomes truly inaccurate. All right. And we don't need to know exactly why this happens. We just need to understand that it does happen. So what's happening right now is I'm going to take 2.45 and I'm going to multiply it by 3.0. If we use a standard calculator, we take 2.45 and we multiply it times 3.0, we get 7.35, right? Well, when we do the same exact thing over here in Python, look at what we get back. This value here. And for the most part, this value is the same, right? It just has all these zeros and a 5 way over here at the end. And even though this value is extremely close to being 7.35, technically it's not 7.35, right? It's this whole number right here. And this can throw off math. So when we're doing math with Python, if possible, it's nicer to do the math equations with integers. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the value that we have as a float in change, and instead we're going to convert it to an integer. So the idea is that if I have $2.89, I'm going to write some code that's going to turn it into this, 289. All right. If my amount of change is 99 cents, it's going to turn it into just 99. All right. If I've got $3.12, well, that's going to turn into 312. All right. So once we take the value and we convert it into these integers here, then it becomes a lot easier for us to work with. So we need to keep in mind that whatever number we have is going to be always 2 places after the decimal, right? So if there's 3 places in the number, sorry about that, the decimal would go here. If we had the value $45.10, well, that would look like this. All right, so going along with that concept, how do we get from 289 to 289? Well, mathematically, we need to multiply times 100. If we multiply times 100, that takes our decimal that we have here, and it moves it 2 places to the right, so it ends up here, which is the same as the whole number, 289. So let's do that right now. We're going to create or call the change variable. We're going to assign a new value to our change variable. We're going to take whatever the change currently is, and we're going to multiply it times 100. All right, I'm going to get rid of these 2 lines because that was just for an example. Now, to make sure that our value has become a valid integer, let's print this line of code again. All right, so let's give it a run. And we can say 399. and now it's become $3.99. Oh, it still has a 0.0 on the end. We need to get rid of that. And what we can do to get rid of that is we can actually say, okay, after you do that math, turn it into an integer. So drop the decimal place after you do the math. And now we have a whole number integer that represents our value. All right, nice. So now we have to start thinking about the logic. I'm going to start putting some comments in here. Actually, we should have comments all the way through this. So we get a value from the user. We don't really need one for our print statement, right? We know if it's a print statement, we're just displaying something. But on this line of code, we are converting the value to an integer. All right, and then we print it out again. Now what we're going to do is determine how many dollars are needed. All right, so the idea behind this is that if we stick with our value, $3.99, we should need $3 bills to make that amount of money, or dollar coins, however you want to look at it. So how would we determine that? How would we write Python code to do that? Well, we're definitely going to use our integer division that we talked about earlier. So first of all, let's create a variable to hold the number of dollars that we need. I'm going to call it num dollars. All right. And of course, if I create a variable, I have to put my equal sign and I have to assign some sort of value to my variable. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my amount of change. So with our example, it's 399, right? So we're not going to put 399 though. We're going to let our variable do the work for us, right? This represents the value. We're going to use integer division and we're going to divide it by 100. Because according to the way we're doing our math, 100 really means $1. So what we're saying is 399, integer division, 100. All right, and if you remember from earlier, 100 can go into this value 3 times. So the answer in this example is going to be 3. All right, but we're not going to use this code right here. That was just as an example. All right. So after we determine the number of dollars that we need to make our amount of change, we need to subtract those dollars from the total amount of change owed. Because if we owed them $3.99, but now we've taken care of the $3, well, we need to remove the $3 from the rest of the money that we owe them, right? Now we only owe them 99 cents. So in Python code, how do we represent pulling those $3 out of the amount that we owe them? What we're going to do is we're going to write a line of code that's going to assign a new value to the change variable. So if you remember up here in our example, we were saying that if the change was $3.99, we'd be able to get $3 whole out of that, right? So what we're going to do is take that amount of change, which would have been $3.99, and from it, we're going to subtract the number of dollars times 100. So if we were able to get $3 out of that, this would be a 3, and this would be 100. So this amount right here would total 300. Our change variable was $3.99. So if we take that $3.99 and we subtract 300 from it, the amount of change that we're left with is 99. The remaining 99 cents that we still owe to our user. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these 2 lines of code right here. And we're actually going to use them again. But this time we're not going to be talking about number of dollars. We're going to be talking about the number of quarters. All right. So if we're using our example, change is 99. All right. And if we're talking about quarters over here, we're not going to be worried about dividing by 100. We're going to divide by 25 because there's 25 cents in a quarter. So that means on this bottom line of code, we should also change the 100 to a 25. So saying this was 99, we're now going to divide the 99 by 25, and we're going to use our integer division. So 25 can go into 99 3 times. So num quarters is going to equal 3. Now we're going to take that 3. This should be num quarters now, which was 3. We're going to multiply that times the 25, which gives us 75, representing 75 cents. And change was 99. So 99 cents minus 75 cents. And I am so bad at math, this is embarrassing, but I'm going to use the calculator. So it was 99 cents, and we're going to subtract 75 from it. So now change equals 24. All right, right here on this line. This is 24 now. All right. So I'm going to copy these lines, and I'm going to paste them in. All right. So we've taken care of our quarter situation. Now we want to change num quarters to num dimes. All right. And I'm going to change it in both places here. And now we're not talking about 25 cents. These are dimes, so we're talking about 10 cents. All right. So change both of those to 10. In our example above, change is currently equal to 24, meaning 24 cents. All right. So we're saying number of dimes is equal to 24, integer division 10. So if we take 24, 10 can go into that 2 times, right? So num dimes is now 2. It's 2 here as well. So we take 2 times 10, which becomes 20, and this is still 24. So if we take 24 minus 20, well, we end up with 4 cents left, right? We still owe the user 4 cents. All right. We need to calculate our nickels next. So I'm going to paste that same code in there. Instead of talking about the num of quarters this time, or whatever, we are talking about nickels this time around. Make sure you change it in that line and in this line down here. Number of nickels, right? And we need to change this value here because a nickel is not worth 25 cents. It is worth 5 cents. All right. So let's think about our example here. Change was equal to 4 right up here. And if we substitute that 4 in for the variable change here, we say 4 integer division 5. So how many times can 5 go into 4? The answer is 0, right? So number of nickels becomes 0. Now to get the new value of our change amount, we take the 0, multiply it times 5, so this becomes 0, right? So we say, okay, change is equal to that 4 cents minus 0. So change is still equal to 4. All right. Last but not least, we got to take care of our pennies. Well, we don't actually need to do any lines of code that say like num pennies are equal to change integer division 1. All right. That's sort of kind of just overkill because we would just be dividing something by 1. And if you divide something by 1, well, it's still whatever that number was, right? Like if I take 4 and divide it by 1, well, it's still 4. So we don't need to actually do any kind of division or anything. But we do need to create a variable called num pennies. And to that, we are going to assign whatever our change value is. And the reason that works is because if we had anything 5 cents or over, this line of code right here would take care of it. and it would be a nickel, right? Because then we'd have 5 cents, we could turn it into 1 nickel, and then we could subtract that 5 cents from the change value. So once we make it down here, the value should be less than 5. So that's the main logic for determining how many of each coin are needed, all right? And I know we say dollars, but dollars can be coins as well, right? So I'm going to change my comment here to just say determine how many coins are needed, because we're going to do the same steps for all of the coins that we have. All right. So now at this point, each one of these variables, num dollars, num quarters, num dimes, num nickels, and num pennies, they all have values associated with them at this point. Now we need to write some if-else statements to determine how we're going to print these values out. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if num dollars is greater than 0. Because if num dollars is 0, we're not even going to print out any amount of dollars, right? We're just going to ignore that completely. So that's why we need this if statement here. Inside of that if statement, we're going to have another if statement. And we're going to say if num dollars is equal to 1. Then we're going to print our actual variable, num dollars, that holds the amount. And then after that, we need to print the word dollar. We only want to have the singular form here, because this is saying if num dollars is equal to 1, this will be a 1, and it will say dollar. Now we're going to have an else statement in here. So this else statement is working with this if statement right here. Okay, these two work together. And it's going to say if num dollars is equal to 1, do such and such. Otherwise, we're going to print out the same thing here, but we're going to put an S on the end. Make sure all of your indentation is correct over here. All right, this print statement is inside of this if, and this print statement is inside of this else. So essentially what this is saying is if num dollars is greater than 0, we're going to go into this code right here. If num dollars is not greater than 0, we're just going to do absolutely nothing, right? If this is false, we're just going to skip all the code inside and we're going to come down here. If num dollars is greater than 0, we're going to check and see if it's equal to 1. If it is 1, we're going to print it out only with the word dollar. If it's not equal to 1, that means it has to be more than 1, and we're going to put an S on the end. And just like above, how we did the same sort of action for each coin, we're going to do exactly the same thing with this. All right, so I copied all those lines. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to come all the way back up against the left margin. And I'm going to paste this code in. All right, now we're going to talk about our number of quarters. So if the number of quarters is greater than 0, we go into this code here. All right, make sure that you change it to quarters in all of these places over here. Right? And then we have to print the word that prints out after the number of quarters. If it's equal to 1, we'll just say 1 quarter. And if it's not equal to 1, then it has to be more than 1. And we will print num quarters. So this will have to be 2 or greater, and we will say quarters with an S. We're going to do this for every one of our coins. So let's go ahead and do it for our dimes next. So if the number of dimes is 1, we will print out the variable, which would have to be 1, right? And we will say dime. And if it's not 1, then it has to be greater than 1. And we are going to put the word dimes with an S. Let's do it again for nickels, and let's do it for pennies. Make sure you change it in every spot. Make sure you change the strings that print out. And I need to do it one last time for my pennies. So if the number of pennies is greater than 0, I'm going to come inside and look at these 2 lines of code. If pennies is not greater than 0, then it has to be 0. And we will skip all this code and we will print absolutely nothing. But if it is greater than 0, we come inside of here and we check to see if it equals 1. If it does equal 1, this will be a 1, and we will say 1 penny. And if it is more than 1, we will print however many pennies, and we will print pennies with an S. All right. So let's take one more look over our code, and then we will run it and test it out. All right. So right here, we're getting a float value from the user and asking them to give us an amount of money. Then we're just printing that out. We're taking the amount of money that they gave us, and we're essentially removing the decimal place, and we're turning it into an integer, which is a whole number. And then we're printing that out to make sure that everything converted well. Now we're saying, okay, how many total dollars can we get from that amount of change? And then we take those number of dollars and we subtract them from the original amount of change, and we end up with a new value. We do that for each one of our coins. So right here, we're dividing by 25 to represent the quarters. We're then subtracting that total amount that the quarters equaled. Then here we're dividing to see how many dimes we can get out of it. Here we're removing the amount of dimes. Same thing with the nickels. How many can we get out of our change? And here we're subtracting any nickels that we took out. Finally, we're left with our number of pennies. And then for each one of those coins, we've got some if-else statements. We have one if that we call an outer if because it's on the outside. Technically, these are nested inside of this if statement. Right? So if the number of dollars is greater than 0, then we check to see if it's equal to 1. If it does equal 1, we print it out without an S on the end. If it doesn't equal 1, then that means it has to be more than 1. And we print out however many dollars and then the word dollars with an S on the end. We do the same thing for each one of our coins. All right. So let's give this code a run, and we need to test it out a couple different times. All right. Looks like it's running well so far, no errors. If you do have errors, don't freak out. Just see what the error says. Go back into your code, see if you can find the problem. All right, so let's put in an amount of money. I'm going to say $2.53. You can put whatever value you want. And I'm going to hit enter. All right. So it was able to convert the value. Uh-oh. Look at this. We got something going on here. We put in $2.53. It's changing it to $2.52. We got to take a look at that. Also, I do have a syntax error here, and let's see what it's telling me. It's telling me to look at line 51, and it's saying, hey, this is the line of code that has the problem. And the problem is that num pennies, like this, is not defined, meaning I don't have a variable named this anywhere in my code. Perhaps I meant this instead. And I believe it is right. I believe I just misspelled the word pennies down here. And if you look in here, I have one too many n's. Let me take one of those out. That should solve that problem. Now let's see what's going on with this amount of change over here, because it looked like it was somehow rounding the value down to the next lower cent. All right, so what am I going to do right now? I'm going to take this integer part off, and I'm going to just print out the value of change times 100 and see what that looks like before we convert it to the integer. So let me do the same thing, 253. Oh, all right, you guys, here's another one of those strange instances where the float values, sometimes they bring errors in mathematically, okay? So it is saying it's 252.9999 repeating, right? And because we converted this number into an integer, when you could do that, it cuts all this part off, right? So instead of rounding up or down or anything like that, it just totally gets rid of all this right here. What we want to do is we want to tell it to actually round this number, because if it rounded this to the next whole number, it would be 253. All right. And look at that. That's throwing off all of our pennies and all kind of stuff. So we need to take this value right here after we multiplied it times 100, and instead of using the integer function, let's use the round function on it. So I'm just going to come right back in front of it, and instead of typing int, I'm going to type round, and that will round the value up or down to the next appropriate number. Now let's give it a run and see what we got. All right, let's try our $2.53. All right, we're looking good. So our amount of change started off as this. Then we multiplied times 100 and we rounded that value, and it gave us the correct whole number. Then it runs through all of our logic to determine how many of each coin we need. And depending on the amount of that coin, it either doesn't print it out at all, right? You don't see any nickels or dimes in here because they're not necessary to make this amount of money. If it has more than one of a certain coin, it has an S on the end, and they all do. So let's just double check our numbers. This will give us $2. This will give us $2.50, and this will give us $2.53. All right. Go ahead and run it a few more times. Let's say I just want to do 99 cents, 0.99. Let's test that out. Looks good. Maybe let's test one that uses a double dollar amount, 2-digit dollar amount. And it looks good. All right, so these two lines of code were not in the example output. If you want to leave this in your code, that is perfectly fine. It does not cause any errors, and it's actually helpful for you to see how the numbers are turning from a float into a whole number here. All right, so test it out as many times as you want. Make sure you don't have any errors. And once you are happy with your code, go ahead and turn it in.